Ever feel like your ear training hits a wall? Like you can name notes and intervals, but you're still not hearing music the way you want. Today, I want to go deeper than the usual drills and routines that we talk about. I'll share what really separates advanced musicianship from just getting by. And I'll introduce a new project that I'm working on. It's music that's built on scientific principles to help you develop your ear simply by listening. For a long time, I was a composer. I have both of my degrees in music composition. That's what I teach. I teach other composers to improve their craft. But I want to talk to you about something I'm doing specifically to help you here. So stick around because by the end of this episode, you'll have a new way of thinking about ear training, and you'll know how to make progress even when you're away from your instrument. Let's start with a personal story. For me, audiation, which is the ability to truly hear and understand music in my mind, clicked while I was in college. So, up until then, I was doing what most musicians do. I was memorizing intervals, naming chords, working through ear training drills. We had this program called MacGammon later. Oh, I hated that program. And then there's another program that used these MIDI sounds, just very software sampler sounds. They're designed to mimic the sound of an actual instrument, but they were horrible. They had no overtones, they had no dimension to them. It was just a single tone. It's actually what you get on most app store purchases. So if you have an ear training app and you're hearing things within the app, but you're not hearing things in real life, that could be part of the problem, actually. But I was using all these conventional programs, and it wasn't until I really started focusing on hearing music internally, away from the instrument, that's when everything changed for me. So suddenly, music became more of a living thing in my mind, not just something I played or analyzed, but something I could actually hear, create, and manipulate in my head. That's one of the reasons I'm so passionate about this topic. I know firsthand what it's like to break through that wall and experience music on a deeper level. And I really want other musicians to be able to experience this too. And I spent so much time of my life just trying to figure out how to develop my ear. I went from program to program, from suggestion to suggestion. I tried everything. And as a composer, I really wanted to be able to hear music deeply. I wanted to be able to hear a composition in my mind and then notate it on paper with a great deal of accuracy. And so I knew that involved two things. I had to be able to audiate the music, and I had to be able to separate it with ear training. So I had to be able to notate what I was hearing, because you can audiate and you can hear something in your mind and have no idea how to put it on paper. And for me, that is an actual prison. It's horrifying because you have these compositions in your head. They fade quickly because maybe your memory isn't where it needs to be. So we got to work on that. And you just have no idea where to start. Am I hearing a fifth, a fourth? What kind of chords am I hearing? They're not chords. What are they? It gets really difficult. So music really is like learning a language. You can memorize vocabulary and grammar, but until you start thinking in the language, you're always translating in your head. The best musicians think in music. And so that's what I wanted to do with audiation and ear training. I wanted to give you the tools that took me decades to create so that you can run. Okay. I crawled. I don't know. I was on the ground going very slowly so that you could sprint. That's the idea here. And I'm telling you, you go through my composing hour course, 3 years, you got what took me decades to create. So it's just, for those that can take advantage of it, it's a great resource. So we're going to talk a little bit about the plateau. This is something I talked about in a previous video. You can go check that out if you want. And I want to talk about why most musicians get stuck real quick. And then we're going to talk about some of the science of hearing deeper. So I've seen this with hundreds of students, from college freshmen to seasoned professionals. You do the work, interval drills, chord ideas, identifying chords, dictation apps, but your musical instincts don't seem to sharpen. The plateau is real, and it usually happens because most ear training is externally focused. Can I name this interval? Can I identify this chord? Deeper musicianship asks more intense questions like, can I feel the gap between the notes? Mozart was quoted as saying music happens in the silence. Whether or not that actually is a direct quote from Mozart, we always attribute it to him. And it speaks to something important in music. Music happens in the silence, but also the gap between the notes is where you actually start to identify the difference between the notes and these intervals. So it's something I talk about much more intensely in my actual training regimens here. But you also need to be able to say, can I anticipate what comes next? When you're playing music or you're composing, can you anticipate what's going to come next? Or are you reading note to note? When you're playing a piece, you practice it to the point where you don't really have to think too much. Your finger memory, muscle memory often takes over. But are you actually anticipating what's coming next in the music when you're sight reading or when you're performing? That's an important thing for musicianship. Also, can you hold a sound in your mind and use it creatively? So if I just have a simple drone going in my mind, can I then hear a melody on top of that? Or is that difficult for me? So it's like learning to ride a bike by reading the manual, okay? You know where the pedals and brakes are. You know how to stop that bike, but you don't have the balance until you get on and ride. And that is how you learn. You just get on and ride. So in music, balance comes from inside, from audiation. Audiation is a way to test ideas. Audiation is a way to preview something you're going to perform. Audiation is a way to better visualize yourself playing on your instrument, which makes you better. I remember I was sitting in the office at my university. Don't remember what the office was for. It was one of the main university buildings. What I do remember is I was there with my composition instructor for some reason. And he was sitting there with his fingers just playing. He was just, it looked like he was actually playing through a composition. And I asked him what he was doing. And he said, "Oh, I'm just practicing." And I realized, I think that was one of the first things that made me realize, oh, I have more to learn, because he is a virtuoso pianist, an amazing composer, and he was just sitting there playing on an imaginary keyboard and hearing what he was playing. And so if you don't have that capability, it's something you want to develop because it's a really important aspect of musicianship. So let's talk a little bit about science here. So your brain is a pattern recognition machine. I talk about this a lot. Neuroscience shows that when you listen deeply and repeatedly to music, your auditory cortex literally rewires itself. And it's funny because I talk a lot about neuroscience. My brother, he's a little younger than me. He was actually a psychology major in college. And so we would drive to school together because we went to the same school and I was always one that drove. And he was really interested in neuroscience. He later became a lawyer, but he was interested in neuroscience. And so he'd constantly talk to me about the pathways and things that were happening as I was listening or talking or eating. It was a little bit annoying after a while, but also it was very educational because I was learning a lot of what he was learning and we're having conversations about it. I'd approach it from the more artsy, I guess, musical standpoint. He'd approach it from a more, this is what's happening in your brain standpoint. And so that kind of set me up, I guess, to really trust science and to become interested in science and to use science quite a bit when actually composing and developing programs for myself and eventually what's now available to you. So there's a concept, we probably all heard this, it's called neuroplasticity. So your brain changes in response to how you use it. So when you practice focused listening, what's happening is you're strengthening the pathways that process pitch, rhythm, and harmony. These neural pathways are really important, and it's like if you took the same route to school every single day on your bike. Let's say you're riding a bike, and you went over a dirt road. Every day, that road would become a little bit more entrenched. It would go down deeper and deeper into the dirt. We had this dog. My mom has this dog, well, had a dog named Violet. And every day they'd throw the ball to her out on the grass. And there is a violet line where the grass has actually been eroded, it's dead, and you can see the path that she traveled every day playing ball. And neural pathways are somewhat similar in that the more you run them, the more you practice a specific skill, the better you get at it. And here's the interesting thing. The more pathways you develop, they start to cross, is the best way I can explain it. They start to intermingle, and you start to have more ability to do the things you want to do. I discovered this actually teaching in college. It's one thing to know theory, it's another thing to teach it. Because when you have to teach it, you have to understand it on a completely different level. And so what ended up happening was, in addition to my teaching, I was always trying to get better. So if I was asking my students to spend an hour to 2 hours outside of class, I was spending 3 learning more about a subject I already knew about. I mean, I didn't have to do this, but I wanted to know more. And what happened over my 8 years of teaching at the university as a professor is I got to a point really about 3-4 years in where nothing fazed me with music theory, ear training. I felt like even if I came across an entirely new concept in music, I could learn it within an hour. And this happened a lot where they'd ask me to teach a new class. And I'd always say, yeah, I could teach that class. And I could because I had such a strong base that if there was something I didn't understand, it didn't take me long. I could literally spend 15 minutes scanning a new book on a new subject, and I'd be able to teach it that night for 3 hours because I had so much base knowledge. And my neural pathways for theory and ear training, they are solid at this point. So here's the catch, right? We want to develop these neural pathways, but mindless repetition does almost nothing. It's the quality of your attention, the way you focus, anticipate, and reflect. That's what's going to drive the real change. And that's what I focus on, especially in my Composing Our Inner Ear training course. Look, it's actually cheaper than private lessons. But the idea behind it was that you get a lesson pre-recorded, you download it to your phone or computer, you just press play, it's audio, so you can really take it anywhere. And you get a 40-minute lesson where I'm actually taking you through exercises. It's 40 minutes of exercises, minimal talking on my part. You also get an introduction for the week where I go over any important points. The introductions can range anywhere from 7 minutes all the way up to over an hour because they're kind of like lectures. It's kind of like letting you know what you're doing, but the actual exercises are where the work comes in. And then since a 40-minute session is pretty long, I also have these 7-minute sessions that you can focus on the days when you just don't have time to complete the 40-minute sessions. And it's not mindless repetition. It teaches you to use a quality level of attention so you can focus, anticipate, and reflect. Think of your brain as a forest. I've always loved the forest. Every time you walk the same path, it gets clearer and easier to follow. If you just wander aimlessly, though, you never make a trail. So if you were just to walk into the forest every day and just randomly walk about, you'd find some interesting things, but you would never develop that strong trail, that strong path. And that path can serve as a starting point for branching out to other trails, because now that you have this solid path, you can always find your way home. That's what we're trying to do with all these courses, a flawless course. That's why there's repetition. The repetition is so important, but it's how you approach it. So with any program, I feel like instructors really need to spend more time talking about how to approach something, because it's too easy to just do something and do it incorrectly and not get the benefit. But when you take your time and you frame it in the correct way, you're going to get better results. So let me give you an example. If I play a C on the piano and I say, imagine that C. Okay. And then I play it again. I say, imagine it again. And then I play it again. I'm like, pretend to hear it in your mind. All right. Now, there are a lot of ways you could imagine it. You could imagine just generally the pitch and not the piano timbre. You could imagine generally a note. You could think the word C. You could think do. There are so many different ways to approach that, but there's only a few ways that are going to actually help you to memorize that C and hear that C's quality. I'm not talking about perfect pitch. I'm talking about the ability to hear a note and hear the timbre, Timbre, not some people spell it another way, but timbre, the actual color of the instrument, and to hear what's actually in that note, nothing else. So if you approach it from, well, yeah, I can hear a C in my mind, but you're not hearing the piano, or you're kind of doing it to the side, like you're not fully focused on it. There's all these little things that you have to do to make sure the exercise is effective. Okay. So we're going to talk about a very powerful idea now. It's something I call the gap principle. It's one of the most important ideas that I teach. So I call it internalizing the gap. I remember when I first started to sense the gap in music, there were these moments of silence or tension between the notes. This is really back in my college years. It changed everything about how I listened and composed. So music is not just sound. It's expectation, tension, and then release. You have to expect to hear something. That right there is important. You have to have an expectation that sound's coming your way. If it comes out of nowhere, you're not prepared for it, you're not ready to receive it. Then once you hear that sound, you have to hear the tension. A note has to feel like it wants to go somewhere. And then you get release. The space between the notes is where the meaning actually lives. And I mean, look at a composer like Beethoven. Bum 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 bum. That's a kid song. There's nothing complicated about it, but it's one of the most memorable tunes we have, right? It is impactful. It's emotional. You get chills on listening to the entire choir and orchestra perform, you know? There's something about Beethoven, what he understood. He understood that you need to have expectation, you need to create tension, and you need to have release. So where is the expectation? The expectation is that we're going to hear some music. Bum. That first note comes and it sets the mood. It's a single tone. Bum, 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 bum. That second note creates tension. Dun, dun, dun. D. This feels like a little bit of a release. D, D. Tension. D. Tension. D. Tension. D. A little bit of a release. So he understood that you could use very simple melodies and create powerful lines because he understood expectation, tension, and release. And he understood that the space between the notes is where the meaning lives. He didn't just go dee 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 dee. He has breaks. Done. So that part where he goes dee 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 dee, he's slowing it down. He's giving you some space to reset, to remember, and then he's giving it to you again. He is forming a neural pathway. He is taking something you already know, a scale, and he is turning it into music. He's adding rhythm. He's adding phrasing. He's adding the orchestra playing harmony. He's doing all these things to make it more powerful, but he is taking advantage of what you already know. And he's doing it in a brilliant way because he's making a scale interesting. And we already know scale, so it's really impactful. You see where I'm going with this? We already have the neural pathways for those notes. Bum, 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 bum. It's just stepwise motion. So we can understand that, we can memorize it, and then he creates something impactful with it. So it's like reading a novel and realizing the story happens not just in the words, but in the pauses, the pacing, and the things left unsaid. There is so much unsaid in Beethoven's music and all the great composers and even, modern works today. It's what's left unsaid that allows us to go into our grooves, our pathways that we've created, to understand what's there, but then also to make additional connections. That's the human mind. AI, we're talking about that these days, and AI just doesn't do it on that level because AI doesn't think like a human. So AI can't create music for humans. It can create some really interesting ideas. It can take what already exists and create something based on that. It may even eventually be able to create new ideas, but they won't necessarily be human ideas because they're going to start to create their own ideas if it's true artificial intelligence. And that may be a good thing, it may be a bad thing, but it's not human. And so if we're still catering towards humans, then we still need to think about expectation, tension, release. AI doesn't need any of that. And that's why AI, I don't think, is going to completely replace musicians. Got on a tangent here, but let's talk a little bit about the mindset that you need and the power of struggle. Okay? Struggle is very important. So let's get honest about mindset. Most musicians approach ear training as a test. I talk about this a lot. But the best progress comes when you treat it as an experiment. You're experimenting. You're not taking a test. When you're doing the flawless course and you're doing these drills, you're not sitting there thinking, I got one perfect fifth wrong. My ear's not getting better. I'm done for. Forget this. I'm not doing it. Or the other approach, okay, I got one wrong. I'm going to do it again until I get 100%. Oh, this time I got a different one wrong. You're thinking of it the wrong way. You just need to view it as an experiment. It is something that is gradually training your mind, and the mind is not perfect. You have to build the pathways before it gets great accuracy. So mistakes are not failures. They're feedback. I remember a student who would get visibly upset every time they missed a chord, okay? We reframed the approach. So every mistake became a clue, a signpost pointing to what needed more attention. So if you hear a mistake in the flawless course, just as an example, or any of the other courses that you take anywhere, it doesn't matter. It's not specific to me. But when you make a mistake, pay attention to that mistake. That mistake is a weakness. And it's exciting when you discover a weakness, because every time you build up a base level weakness, a foundational thing like a chord or an interval, if you can fix that, your ear training foundation just got bigger. And eventually, when you have a very solid foundation, you can stand on it and you can dance on it and you can work with it, So we enjoy these little mistakes because the mistakes make us better. They let us know what we need to focus on, what we need more attention. So the idea here is that science shows your brain learns more when you're challenged and when you're just outside your comfort zone. So if you're doing something where it's always at the edge of your comfort zone, that's great. If you can push it just outside, where you can still see the trails over there and you're just over here a little bit to the right, then that's how you get better. That's actually how you start forming new pathways, or you make those old pathways bigger. So we start with a narrow pathway, right? We're practicing one exercise. Then we add another one to that exercise that just expands it a little bit, and then a little bit and a little bit. And this approach is going to be much more effective than what I did for decades, which was jump from one program to the next saying, didn't work, didn't work, didn't work, Didn't work. When I finally just got down to the fundamentals and I said, I need to pay attention to my mistakes because those are clues for how I can improve. That's when my ears started to get really good. And I applied this approach while teaching in college too, because I realized that I needed to now see if these same mistakes are ones my students would make. And I'd find more gaps in their knowledge. So they'd point out just by their development and my experience with them, I would be able to see the space in between their levels. So if they could identify a chord, but intervals were kind of hard for them, then I knew that we had to focus on having them identify intervals in a chord, things like that. And eventually I developed an entire program, but I say we because they really helped me because they were kind of my guinea pigs. And I could take what worked for me, test it on them, 1,400 students over the years, and really refine it. So that's why what I do is unique, because not a lot of people, when they teach ear training, really think too much about that. I hate to say this, but a lot of times professors, they already have a good ear. And if they did develop it, they've kind of forgotten the process that they had to go through, because it's now a thing where it's like, well, all you have to do is practice, but it's actually more than that. You have to do more than practice. You have to approach ear training the right way. And so not a lot of investment goes into actually learning how to teach ear training. We just have these skills that we say these work if you practice them enough, go practice. But without the direction, it never really works. So that kind of brings us into focused repetition and narrowing your scope. Really important. One of the biggest mistakes I see is trying to do too much at once. So let's talk about elite athletes. I like to talk about this because I have some experience running track in high school, but I'm definitely not an elite athlete now. But what they do is they'll repeat the same movement until it's second nature. In music, that means picking a small set of sounds and going deep. I once worked with a Hollywood composer who was overwhelmed trying to master every scale and mode. We dialed it back a little bit. It was like just 2 intervals and 1 chord progression for a month. Seems like, we always want to progress really quickly, but the best way to develop your ear really quickly is to not do it quickly. Because if you go quickly, you never develop the rudimentary skills. You never build the foundation. You're building your house on straw. I don't know, but it's going to float away the first time it rains. So he later emailed me and said, I'm hearing things in film scores I never noticed before. It's like my ears woke up. And that was just 2 intervals and 1 chord progression for a month. And I mean, that's really the basis for a lot of the training that I do. And the science and the research, it backs this up. So focused and deliberate practice on a narrow skill leads to faster, deeper learning than scattered, broad practice. And I've done some other videos where I actually cite the research and the science. But at this point, what you have to understand is I spent really the first 3 years of my college teaching experience researching, trying to figure out what methods work, which ones don't. Is there any basis for what I'm doing? Can I test this on my students from semester to semester? One semester I'd try this, another semester I wouldn't do that, and I'd do something different. I'd say, oh, actually the students from the first semester did better. Next semester, brought back more of what I did the first semester. Saw results, said, okay, this is something we have to keep. Later, 2 semesters later maybe, I took it away. Didn't get the results I wanted. Added it back in. Students started to pick up again. So, it's all this trial and error. So for me, a lot of the research, I still read it, but I don't often cite it because I've lost it. It's one of those things where you teach for 8 years and the experience starts to override the science. But I think you have to start with the science. And one of the principles I know that I have discovered that scientists realize that we all should understand, teachers know this, focused, deliberate practice leads to faster results and deeper learning. So Going to talk a little bit related to that. I'm working on a new project, which is kind of fun. It's just ear training by listening. It goes along with the flawless course. It's something that I'm actually really excited about. So I'm going to take a little tangent here for a moment. But, for years, students were asking me, how can I keep improving my ear when I'm not at the piano or the practice room? And this question kind of inspired my latest project. It won't be out for a little while, but it's something that is brewing. So I'm creating a series of musical pieces. They're built on scientific principles, and they're designed to help you develop your ear simply by listening. So there's a field called implicit learning. It's how we pick up language, accents, and even musical styles by immersion. I'm applying those principles. I lost interest in composition, and I lost interest because I started to write music. I was like, okay, great. You've written the music you wanted to write. You have developed this level of audiation, and now you can write anything you hear. My ear has reached a point where I don't really struggle much with taking what's in my head and putting it on paper. I'm not saying it's perfect, but I'm really good at very quickly narrowing down what I hear, committing it to paper. And once I developed that skill, I lost interest. I just didn't want to compose anymore. But it was weird because I always viewed myself as a composer. I was going to be a composer. I went to school for my bachelor's and master's program, and I got a music composition degree. And I really loved creating music. And then all of a sudden, once I learned how to do it, how to write the music that was in me, I just lost all interest. All right, so the power of reflection. Let's talk a little bit about that. We're going to take a moment for reflection. When I was a young composer, I'd listen to symphonies and try to write down what I heard. No piano, just my music and a pencil. And I started with smaller works. It's not like I picked up a symphony and said, here we go. I started with piano works. And Virko Bali was actually the one that made me do that. He would have me listen to and actually compose a work as if I was a composer. So it was something that kind of inspired me to do this. I would just start to listen to music and try and transcribe it. So some days I'd get lost, but over time I started to hear the music before I wrote it. And that was a really exciting time for me because I've been starting to practice these audiation skills, but this is when it started to become more practical. So journaling or just mentally noting your experiences can be powerful. So writing down the music you hear is a good way to start practicing audiation. And when you do this, just kind of ask yourself, you want to constantly ask for feedback. What surprised you today in your ear training, your audiation? Where did you struggle? What did you notice that you hadn't heard before? If you're not doing this, one, your motivation wanes, and two, you're not sending the message to the brain that what you're doing matters and that you truly care about it. If you just do the repetition without a little bit of reflection, I feel like it's not as effective. That's why at the end of every lesson for the composing hour, I ask students to reflect on the experience that day. And it changes from day to day, and that's an important thing to know. So reflection helps to consolidate learning. That's what we know. It's like sleep for your musical mind. You're processing, organizing, and deepening what you've experienced. Okay? So I'm not giving a how-to today. You might be thinking, okay, but how do I actually do this? It's kind of the million-dollar question, and it's what I cover in detail in my courses and private lessons. So what I do here is I provide you actionable advice. I provide you strategies. I provide you information, but I don't really talk about the implementation because that's what I reserve for the courses. But for somebody who can take this information and apply it, it can be life-changing, right? So I want you to leave with a new mindset today, okay? Ear training is about changing how you listen, not what you listen to or what program you're using. It's changing how you listen. The how is important. You can go through an ear training course, identify a bunch of intervals, get them right or wrong, and then say, okay, I'm done. Did my training for today. And that will show you results over time. Or you can go in with the right intention. What can I hear today that I didn't hear yesterday? What does this interval sound like? Does it sound stable? Does it sound like it wants to move? How did this interval differ from the previous one? So, real active approach where you're constantly trying to think about what's going on in the sound you're hearing. The other thing I want you to keep in mind is that the space between notes is as important as the notes themselves. Listen to the silence, appreciate the silence. By giving that silence a little bit of space, you give more character to the notes that follow and come before. Also, mindset and focus are going to be your best tools for real lasting progress. So when you're ready for the how, you'll be motivated and focused. That, and not before, is when the flawless ear training course, private lessons, or guided practice sessions like in the composing hour come in. I encourage you not to do ear training until you have the motivation and focus and a basic understanding of what it is you're trying to accomplish. If you just go and saying, I want to develop my ear, that's not enough. You want to know that you want to develop your ear to specifically get better at some aspect of your musicianship. You need to have a goal, and you need to say each day you do your ear training, you need to approach it with that expectation that you're working towards that goal. So if my goal is to be able to take the music in my head and put it on paper, then every day that you do the ear training, you say, I'm doing this because I want to be able to audiate and notate my ideas. And I'm not going to do this by not practicing. I just need to start, that sort of thing. So if this resonated with you, I'd love to help you go deeper. Check out my courses, join my email list. There's a bunch of links in the descriptions here, or just reach out with your questions. I'm here to help. I don't mind having calls with people and answering questions. Maybe if I get too busy, if it blows up too much, that'll be a problem and I'll have to figure out how to deal with that. But right now, ask me questions. I will answer them. And I like answering them because when you ask me questions, it allows me to stay focused, because I'll frame every question in, okay, first of all, I want to help this student. I want to help this person solve a problem. So that's my first focus. My second focus is, now, does that question affect the way I teach? Is that something that I need to think about when creating these courses? And so it makes my courses better. That's why I don't believe in creating in a vacuum. I think you need to have interaction in a community, which is something I'm going to start over at UreMusic.com, UreMusic. There's going to be a community where people can get together, share conversations while they're going through these courses, because I think a community would be very valuable for all of us, me included. But for now, just keep an eye out for my new music project. I think it's going to change the way we think about ear training. Ask me any questions. Try listening differently. Notice the gaps in music. Embrace the struggle in developing your ear. And remember, every bit of effort brings you closer to the kind of musician you want to be. So thanks for listening. If you found this helpful, please share it with a fellow musician or write something in the comments here. Until next time, keep listening, keep imagining, and keep making music from the inside out.